YouTube family, it's me Blanche and welcome back to Feast in the Middle East. Now, as a food columnist, a cooking teacher, and the author of the cookbook Feast in the Middle East, I get asked often, Blanche, what is your favorite recipe during the winter? And I'll tell you, it's always the same. It is Palestinian MAFTOUL, our answer to chicken noodle soup. Except instead of noodles, we use MAFTOUL, which is the Arabic word for couscous. Except for the traditional couscous that you see in the stores, these are larger grained, all the better to soak up all of that chicken broth. Now you could find this couscous in Middle Eastern markets as well as online, but if you can't find couscous, you can use Italian acina di pepe, which works really well in this soup. Another interesting addition to the soup are chickpeas, because the chickpeas, when cooked, turn really buttery and they melt in your mouth, and they add another hearty dimension to this soup. This dish is aromatic with allspice, sweet onions, garlic, and I like to add tomato because the tomato with the chicken broth is perfect. Now I have shared this recipe on my channel before, but I have streamlined it even more, so it's that much easier for you to recreate from your very own kitchen. And with that, let's get started. I'll show you how to make my favorite chicken soup.
I start with 2 pounds of chicken drumsticks or thighs because they have more moisture and flavor. To that, I add a couple of bay leaves and a cup of chopped onions. And there's no such thing as too much garlic in my family, so I use a whole bulb of garlic and I chop each one in half. A tablespoon of allspice berries, which I prefer to the powder because they add tremendous flavor without altering the color of the soup. Follow that with some ground pepper and a tablespoon of salt. I know that sounds like a lot of salt, but this is a big pot of soup. Finally, I puree about 3 tomatoes and add that. Now, this is an optional addition. If you don't like tomatoes, you don't have to add them. Then I add enough filtered water so that there's only about 1.5 inches from the top. To add an even richer tomato flavor, I add 1 to 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Now, this is really dependent upon your love of tomatoes, and I certainly love tomatoes. Stir that around and watch it boil. And that's really it for the soup. How easy is that? You just want to put it over a high heat until it boils, and then reduce the heat to a simmer and simmer for about 1 hour. I generally like to cover the pot during the simmering process. Now I want to strain the broth. In order to do that, I take out all of the chicken pieces and set them aside for later. Then I pour the broth through a colander into a large metal bowl. To expedite the straining process, I just stir around all of the onions, the garlic, and the allspice until all the liquid goes through, and then I toss out the stuff from the colander. What results is this gorgeous and rich tomato chicken broth, which I'm also going to use to cook up the MAFTOUL. If you don't have MAFTOUL, you could use the Italian style acina di pepe as well. That's really easy to find in most supermarkets. To the MAFTOUL, I add about 1 tablespoon of butter and 1 tablespoon of good quality olive oil, preferably Palestinian olive oil. I toast the MAFTOUL in the butter and oil until the butter melts. And then it's time for the broth. Cooking up the MAFTOUL is usually a 2-to-1 ratio, so 2 cups of liquid to 1 cup of MAFTOUL, but look at the package directions because it could vary from one brand to the other. I season the MAFTOUL simply with about 1 teaspoon of salt to taste, wait until the mixture boils, cover, then simmer for about 20 minutes. Again, this could vary depending on the type of MAFTOUL that you are using. Then I use about 1/2 to 1 cup of garbanzo beans or chickpeas, and I cook them in the broth for about 15 minutes to make them nice and buttery. As you can see, the MAFTOUL is fully cooked. It is fluffy and beautiful. Time to serve up my favorite soup of all time. I usually take a couple of big scoops of MAFTOUL for the base, followed by the chicken, which I shred up so that I can put some in each bowl. And then finally, a huge ladle of that beautiful broth with the chickpeas. You could also add additional vegetables to the chickpeas if you like, from zucchini to butternut squash. For more healthy Middle Eastern and
and Mediterranean recipes, check out my cookbook, Feast in the Middle East. All you have to do is go to feastinthemiddleeast.com, click on the cookbook tab, and you are good to go. Until next time, I'll be back with more comforting and traditional recipes.